All right, good morning. It still is morning. How's everybody feeling today? Cheery, excited? We've heard some very fascinating news, some very positive outlooks, some very scary suggestions on sanctions and how that's going to affect our businesses. And so I just remember David telling me yesterday, don't buy Huawei and drink heavily. So now we're here to lighten the mood and talk about one of our favorite topics, the merry-go-round of infrastructure issues in Asia. We have a panel of experts with us here today. John O'Mara sitting next to me from CJI, Max Motschmann from IJM, Abdul, Charafeddin, did I say this correctly, from UAS, and Sheree Cheung from Hong Kong Business Aviation Center. So the questions that CJI had put up on the website, what we're talking about today is how do airports view business aviation? Will we always be crowded out? And why are investors in the economy flying on these aircraft into the country? So here are some slides that we saw at CJI a few years ago, actually in 2017. David Best and Charlie Merlarski both presented them, and I continue to use them in many of the presentations because it's a 20-year report from IATA. And this is data that is relevant, that the regulators will be looking at. They understand passenger traffic, airline information. So if we're looking at some of these top airports in Asia Pacific, and they're already at capacity now here in 2019, or shortly will be reaching capacity, both at the runway and terminal. So why does this matter to us? Because if they have more and more flights, they're taking up more space, and with a reduced infrastructure, we will not have anything for business aviation. Yesterday we heard from some operators talking about clients choosing the management company on how they can get slots or how they get parking and completely disregarding other criteria. And this is an important fact to consider because for many people in this room, in the finance and legal industry, at the beginning of the value chain, this affects the buyer's decision. Maybe they won't purchase the aircraft and they'll instead go for a jet card program or continue to fly first class. And so, John, I'd like to ask you, from your experience flying globally, what do you see as the common problems in Asia compared to other regions, and what are some of the lessons that you think we can apply here to solve the problem?
Well, one of the issues of flying here in Asia versus other places in the world is that you almost always require a slot. And I think Max is going to touch on that topic in probably the next slide or so. But the needing a slot, to take off, a slot to land, and an airway slot. So that's the difficult part. Flying in the U.S. is very easy. You rarely need a slot unless you go to a New York area airport or Washington, D.C. In Manila, we have a problem with curfews. GA flights cannot take off and land between noon and 7 p.m. And there's always a noise issue.
I think many of the airports have this. Sheree, I know this is a topic for you as well. Hong Kong has been in the news a lot lately with slots and parking. Noise restrictions here in Seletar, there's also been a curfew implemented, which severely impacts our business. So Sheree, do you have any comments on that as well?
Okay, I think Hong Kong International Airport has been a very busy international hub, so it is something that we have been fighting for. I think a couple years ago we did have quite severe situation on slot. I think together VESPA and the community operators, we are fighting for more slot with the authorities, and I think right now we do have 15 night slot that is allocated for GA. Of course, we do see quite good chance on getting some day slot, especially weekdays. But of course, Hong Kong International Airport, we are building the third runway. So hopefully later on it will be getting better of choice of time slot.
I think we also have to look at the past and where we've actually come from and what we have achieved instead of always looking at the problems. And this is going to be one way that we can take the lessons learned from other areas and make the improvements, because complaining about the problem won't get us anywhere. We need to innovate together. And the next slide, I found this fantastic emoji when I was searching for this presentation. It's a laughing, crying face. I'm going to petition Apple to put this on the iPhone because this accurately describes the frustrating hilarity many operators are facing. And I'm sure some of you who are selling the aircraft get phone calls from owners irate that they're not able to take off and land when they want to, and it's not as easy as maybe the concept that they had in their mind. So expectation not meeting reality. Max, you're also flying around the world and have jets based in the Philippines going into Hong Kong. This was an example that you presented. What are some of the issues that we can face with this type of situation?
Yeah, first of all, it is departure slots. We have almost in every airport, major airport here in Asia, already issues when can we leave the airport. And then when you get the departure slot, your arrival slot for the other airport might be totally out of your time frame. So there is no integrated slot arrangements or coordination system which leaves everything just hanging in the air. In addition to the departure and arrival slots, the problem is also the ramp space. It's very difficult, meanwhile, to get ramp space in the Philippines. In Hong Kong, it has a little bit eased up, but Manila, almost impossible to get. Other airports, parking, they tell you, okay, you can come for 4 hours here, and then you leave. And where did you get now your slot again to depart, to park your aircraft? So it's really a headache, and ASPA will do something under the present board to coordinate more with the airport, with the national civil aviation authorities and with air traffic control, that this issue is more coordinated with, in terms of at least departure and arrival slots.
I think this brings up a very good point, and many airports in Asia Pacific are actually using the OCS system, and they have capabilities to talk to each other, but currently they are not. So you have to have team sitting in front of a computer, being desk warriors, fighting for slots, and waiting up until all hours of the night to grab it as soon as it comes in. So this reduces efficiency, reduces profitability, and slots go to waste, and does not help the business aviation case with the regulators. So something that we can all do is when we're talking to the governments, talking to the regulators, is petition them to open up the OCS to communicate with other airports so that it's a little bit easier to coordinate in all aspects. Abdul, you also work for a trip support company. I'm sure you experience this on a daily basis.
Certainly, and the slot issue is not just something really recently, and it's not only business jet. They are really having difficulties with getting a slot. Actually, commercial airlines, which is they've been in the market for a longer time, and they're also having issues with the slot. And the thing is, like the business jet stakeholders, they have not really thought about how we can really overcome this problem, despite all the efforts has been done over the past few years. I see that there's a slot assembly held yearly, twice a year, by the airline, IATA members and non-IATA members. They get together every year to allocate a slot and negotiate among themselves. Where we see the business jet operator, obviously, they are absent and they're not doing anything about it, and we just keep fighting among ourselves how we can really get slot, why the airport is rejecting us or not acting on our behalf. I think we have to really take it to the extreme and start the job from start, how we can really get slot. And in this case, we have to really work all together with the other aviation industry, like the commercial airline, the airport, our business jet association, whether it's ASPA and MBAA and so on. I don't think it's really difficult. A slot normally allocated much earlier in the day is not just something where a business jet operator, when I come right now and I say I want to fly, it's not going to happen. Everything is regulated. So we really have to start, organize ourselves from the beginning and have more slot allocated for us way before.
Thank you. I think that highlights a very good point. And also, we do have some polling questions, so if you can get on Slido and put in your answers, that will help us with the discussion as well. But as you mentioned, the airlines are getting together in a room and talking about slots and how they can be allocated amongst themselves. These are direct competitors. And in Asia, I think we're actually pretty good with this, with the associations like ASBA, IBAC Support, MBAA. But you go to other parts of the world, and if you are in a room with your direct competitor, there's this awkward, stony silence, and nobody wants to work together. They're afraid to share trade secrets and be seen, fraternizing with the enemy. So we have to change this mindset, and we have to work together in order to improve the situation. How do airports view business aviation? All right, so I think we all know the answer to this. Sheree, I know you have a slide that you will talk about a bit later, but from your perspective in Hong Kong, would you say there's a difference in how the airports view business aviation today versus 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago?
We started when this new airport opened around 21 years ago. It wasn't easy at the start. I think we are one of the first few operators in the regions. I think the mentality from the governments or authority well understand the importance of business travelers to convenience. And however, I think there are constraints on a mixed-use airport. But at the same time, I think that also, as I think earlier in some other presentation, political is always one of the things that, the third one-way took us longer than we expected. So the capacity is constrained. But at the same time, I do see, as explained earlier, we do need some dedicated slot for business aviation. And the government does see that happens. When the OCS first used it at the Hong Kong International Airport, basically, that was nightmare. I'm sure every trip planner, everyone, operators will experience that during that moment. But I think as a community, as all the stakeholders, they work together supporting with facts, as Sarah also highlight, rather than complaining. So we're presenting the facts, the importance of the travelers and the impact to them. And so they're willing to provide more facilitation. For example, night slot, that's how it started. And also the 2 hours break in order to match the recipient airport, because the matching time may not be as perfect as we like. So these are the additional measures, even though we're still using the OCS at the Hong Kong International Airport. We do have some accommodation as a whole, as a stakeholders from the community. So balancing all the stakeholder views, and so I'm sure we still have room for improvement. At the same time, HABC trying our best to facilitate all different views and present it to the government as well.
Thank you, Sheree. Max and John, from your perspective with the Philippines, Manila obviously has a lot of constraints and bans, but sometimes people work around that. So what would you say the airports in the Philippines?
Oh, I must say, especially Manila International Airport is a major headache. And like John mentioned before, we have blackout hours, where nobody's supposed to take off or land with a business jet or with any business aircraft. We have to approach the whole problem not just on an airport-to-airport basis, but on an ASEAN-wide basis. And I have just had this morning some discussions with people, and we will approach it now via the departments of industry, the departments of tourism, etc., to accept us as an equal partner of the airline and not as the rich boys flying around in Asia. Because the perception, or how it is shown in the newspapers, the business jet is not seen as a tool. The business jet is seen as a toy for the big boys. And I had this morning a pretty long argument, And I explained, I said, if you bring a full load of 777 passengers for 2 nights, 3 days to the Philippines, they add less to the economy as if you bring in a business jet for just a couple of hours into Manila. The value, the economic value which is left in the country is much higher by a business jet than by a 777 full with passengers who are staying 2 nights, 3 days in the country.
I agree with everything Max said. At Manila, our hangar is about 100 meters from runway 13. We get our engine start clearance, we get taxi clearance, and we hold short for almost an hour while every ATR 42 or Airbus takes off in front of us. It's really frustrating. And then when you come back in and check in with approach control, you might be number 15 for the approach. And then when you land, going back to our hangar, which is right near Terminal 4, Air Asia could be blocking both taxiways, waiting for the get to their gate. So that's a difficulty there.
Yeah, and I would agree, and I think this is another point that Sheree had, was connectivity. So for strategic growth, this is what we need to be discussing with the governments, because Max has a point, and I know we talk about this until we're blue in the face. What is the value that our jets bring to the economy? Because the public perception is there is a whiny rich boy or girl in the back of an $80 million aircraft, and who cares if they're inconvenienced by a couple hours? They're not viewing this as the Li Ka-shings or Jack Ma's or Bill Gates of the world, who are actually moving our global industry and adding a lot of value to our economies. So this is something that we need to make as our narrative across the entire value chain. But we also need to look towards the future for the strategic growth. How do we outpace population growth, increased air travel, and make sure that we can have this connectivity? And so some of the other points from Sheree here, capital, technology, jobs. So as we build infrastructure, this will also create new jobs. It is small, so when they look at a 650, right, 2 people on the airplane, less fuel, less landing fees, less passenger tax, no duty-free shopping. So you're comparing apples to oranges. And we need to make sure that we do our part to talk not just to the CAA and to the authorities on that part of the operational process, but the economic bureaus as well. It goes across the entire board, because if we only talk to the CAA, they know the points. They hear it every day. But we need to get across all levels of government and make sure that we're part of the 5-year plans, for example, in China, that highlight the importance of general aviation. Even in the Greater Bay Area, we've now actually been mentioned as an important factor. It's not necessarily that it will grow, but it's there. And I think that's a big win. So that's something that we should also focus on. So.
Maybe
Max.
another observation, especially in Manila. You have seen we have a new radar system in Manila, and the approach delays have been cut down tremendously. However, the departure delays have come up also tremendously. Waiting an hour for a takeoff clearance as number 10 somewhere in a row is not unusual nowadays, even for an airline. Because air traffic control staggers the aircraft too tight, especially in Manila. And they don't use the high-speed approaches, despite the fact that we have now a second high-speed turnoff. So we also have to talk to the air traffic controllers and tell them, please guys, our jets can fly like anything else. Expedite the traffic through high-speed approaches as they are done in Hong Kong or in other airports, Singapore, etc., to get a full utilization of the runways. And give a little bit space so that you can shoot out an aircraft in between. Because it's useless if we are staying 1 hour on the ground and nothing is happening.
That's a very good point. And John, I think you also highlighted some of this with, looking towards the future, how we can change the systems to help maximize existing infrastructure. So would you agree with Max's comments? Do you have any other input?
Well, I do agree with Max's comments. Don't everybody be shocked now. But the approach control and departure control can handle a lot more airplanes now. Once you get clearance to take off, and they sequence it a lot. When I said number 15, it's not an hour delay to land. They pump airplanes in to runway 6 or 24. The other problem is there's maybe 10 airplanes waiting to take off, and it's finding space to take off is incredible. We should send the controllers to San Francisco and let them see how it's done.
Abdul, also, I think you raised this question because I think you see just as much as any of us in the panel or in the room, a lot of times business jets are being blamed for things that are happening at the airport, and that may or may not be the case. So what's your input here?
Certainly, this is something that has been controversial for some time, and we've been business jet stakeholder been taking the blame, and frankly, we never had any something to say back. But if we look at the whole situation, as mentioned earlier, commercial airlines, they have a problem, with airport slots and parking, and business jet have the same problem as well. So I think like the airports really not doing enough, or they're not even having proper planning for the future. They cannot even sustain the commercial airline business, which is something is supporting the most. They're not even catering to that. So if we put the business jet also in the equation, that will create more problem for the airports. So the airports, even though despite all the development and update they are doing, they still lack or inadequate of effort has been done to accommodate to the growing business, whether business jet or the commercial airline, both of them all together, they are fighting for the same slot. So I think like the airports, they have to really do more in terms of getting better management, using technologies to speed up process. And we do see right now airports, they are already using technology like to the e-gates and to speed up the process. But a lot of time you see any flights or one of us that go to the airport have to spend 3 hours at least in the airport, which is, I think it's a lot of time, it's wasted of time. And at the airport, they can really process things much faster, security, immigration, and all that. So at least we didn't have to waste so much time. The airport, I think, has mostly to be blamed for the chaos happening for all the stakeholders.
Thank you. Sheree, you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the concerns you raised earlier about the one-way occupations time, I think the authority does aware of it, and they are looking into increasing the capacity while considering the private jet much faster in terms of takeoff time. So they are putting those in equation. I'm sure this is the reason why we're able to get some improvement, especially in the last 12 to 18 months. Another thing is about the exit on the formalizations of airport. I think similar to a lot of speaker has highlighted, safety is priority, and it is something sometime in Asia we do have a lot of airports, and the airport may not be designated to BA only, so can become packs on how it exits. So that's why I think recently we are together with CD, ESPA, we've been promoting more of this to all the pilots in the world, and especially those are first-timer to Hong Kong. And hopefully by demonstrating the community effort, the authority can consider improvement in terms of how to accommodate more aircraft in between the larger airlines. So I think these are the continuous efforts that the airport has been conducting. I do see some improvement, and hopefully with collaboration. The third point I want to mention about Sarah also highlight the Greater Bay Area that in the south connecting 13 cities. And in my earlier slide that we highlight actually to the governments that we are in a community serving the business executive. And it's very important for them to have the convenience, especially those cities doesn't have coverage from the commercial airlines. And we have done studies with the help of the communities. Together, that we find out that there are more than doubles of the city coverage that from the business jet can outreach from the Hong Kong. So I think from that angles, we continue to see we'll have more collaboration, especially more nearby airports in the Greater Bay Area. So we're currently also working with the CJI Airport. So nearby facility is something that we all looking for, how to improve, how to streamline, how to collaborate and make it more effective and efficient for everyone.
Thank you, Sheree. I think also, with connectivity we talked about before, and I saw a question from not Paul Jebley regarding getting a helicopter from an app and paying $20 more than you might pay for your car transport when you're on the ground in Asia. Factor in that he's probably only spent 15 minutes in the helicopter rather than 3 hours in the car. I would say that that is a very good deal. One of the things that with Greater Bay Area, I know we're looking at connectivity with helicopters. I believe I saw in both in Australia and the US that urban air mobility, they're testing out drone deliveries and things such as urban air taxis. So this is going to be something that we really need to focus on together as an industry. This is a lesson learned. Yes, in the US, the airspace is open. It's free. There's more airports. It's easy. A lot of the buildings have heliports already, or helipads, excuse me. What are the viewpoints from the panelists on if we can implement this in Asia? Do you think that in places like the Philippines or Indonesia, that airspace will become free enough where we can have a similar model?
Yeah, we had in the ASPA chapter in Manila recently the discussion about helicopter taxi, and INAIC together with us and have now started a couple of weeks ago the air taxi by helicopter around Manila. Again, we have in cities around Asia, there's one problem. It's not the flight during daytime, it's the flight in bad weather, especially when there is heavy rain showers, and during nighttime. There is no obstruction lighting. So Philippines is very restrictive with helicopter taxi during nighttime. Yeah? And you would need night vision goggles to really see some of the cranes which are being put up without any obstruction light or obstruction marking. And they are coming up just overnight. Just beside the runway in Manila, there's one heavy lift operator, and he just extends his crane to 50-meter height just beside the runway. Yeah? So there needs to be a little bit of education towards the Civil Aviation Authority to implement stronger obstruction light. This will help foster air taxi or helicopter operation. I can't see anything else. The airspace is just too crowded, and if you have to fly 1,000 feet above ground, just to be safe, you're not flying into a crane. You're already obstructing airline traffic.
I think that's one of the questions from the audience is a lot of growth is happening around Hong Kong, and won't that lack of airspace be an issue? And so if we think about the traditional business jet, yes, there's already a lack of airspace, but I think if we start to move into the helicopter and urban air mobility concept, that will completely change. We'll have the different airways. We won't be using the same airways that the airlines and the jets are using. So this is where we need to be thinking. We need to stop trying to fix the problem with the existing infrastructure. We need to innovate and create the solutions and build new infrastructure to support where the industry is going. Sheree, you had a comment?
Yes, as highlighted earlier, connectivity is the most important things for the business travelers. And I think from from Hong Kong perspective, we are part of the stakeholder in the committee, so we have been discussing with the Chinese government, especially the authorities, about the cost boundaries helicopters. And it is in a good progress, I would say. There is already some policy supporting the low-latitude flying. So in terms of framework, from the legal perspective, I'm sure we have a lot of lawyers here. So there is something that within the framework we can further develop on how we can make the procedure much easier. Currently, the thing is we can fly. We've been handling helicopter for cost boundaries to near southern part of China, like Shenzhen, Guangzhou. So, but the problem is the filing application is quite lengthy. So what we are working on is on the Greater Bay Area initiative in China. So hopefully there will be a sections about business jet and how to simplify and facilitate the procedures. So we do need, hopefully, as said, instead of 3-hour drive, that can be minimized to reduce it to 15 to 20 minutes helicopter ride. So, and then you can get to town to avoid all the traffic and transport time.
If we go back to the slides, Al? Thank you. So what does the future hold? There's a report by Bloomberg that says the smaller hub airports are spending $1 trillion on tune-ups. And I also had some information that John helped find that Sydney-based Kappa Center for Aviation has some estimates with regards to new infrastructure and upgrades to existing. So the numbers that they state are $255 billion for airports worldwide, for new airports, and $845 billion to be spent on upgrades such as additional runways and terminals. There was a question from the audience regarding working together with the airlines. And so with this concept, if we're looking at building additional airports, we can talk about having our own airport and how does that work with the airlines. We want to be part of the solution, be on the same team as the airports, as the airlines, instead of being shunned aside and just becoming a problem for everybody. So Abdul, you and I were speaking a bit earlier as well. What do you think about dedicated business aviation runways at existing airports, if they're adding new runways or having innovation past legacy design?
I think this would be the right direction the business jet can start, and the experience already has been done in North America and Europe, and we see it's working just fine. So certainly replicate the same thing in Asia will cater to the business jet and will support them by all means. We're talking about airports are expanding, and are they really taking into consideration all the growth that for both business jet and commercial airline in the future? I don't think the airports, we have seen airports in the past that have expanded and still they are inadequate to support the full-fledged of the operation or the flights altogether. So definitely, allocating a special runway or a terminal for business jets, something will be the right direction, because business jet, if we see year after year, it's the business jet numbers are growing and will continue to grow. And we see this is the future of the aviation, where we see more ultra high net worth individuals on an aircraft, and this will continue to grow. So definitely the authorities and the stakeholder and the governments, they should really see that there's a great potential for business jet to grow and should be able to cater to this niche of industry by growing, having something more of infrastructure to support their flights.
Thank you. Al, would you be able to go back to the questions? We'll answer a few before the blinking lights say our 2 minutes is up. I think there was a question with regards to a monopoly at an airport. If you are a single FBO provider at an airport, does that reduce incentive to do things better, more efficiently? I can only guess who that might be directed at. Sheree, do you have any comment?
Once again, we are just the only FBO in Hong Kong. However, I think in the big things in Hong Kong, that land is also quite limited. We also under a lot of government's initiative, for example, a lot of pricing, a lot of control and also some of the support to the government. So to a way, it is something that, how we support the BAGA development, as well as how we connecting to the nearby city that is only an hour drive from us. So there are options available in our part of the areas, but at the same time, though we are the single payer there, but we do also need to play a lot of efforts into how to facilitate the business travelers, especially we are commercially run, but at the same time we under the airport authority control, the civil aviation departments and all that, so we want to make sure that everything operates in a safe manner and effective manner.
Thank you, Sheree. Last question. Does our panel think that a single aviation market in Asia or ASEAN will ease the issues in terms of coordinating? Abdul, you're poised, ready to speak.
Yes, it's a really interesting question, and I think, yes, there's a lot. And if we look, a lot of airlines, they are not using utilizing the full slot they allocated to them. And a lot of them, they are being traded off or fortified. So definitely the business jet can really step in and take those slots, which is, I think, or work along with the commercial airline to take those slots or even the parking and just not to go on waste, or even sometimes they can really purchase those slots from the commercial airlines.
That's a very good concept. That might be something we can take a look at. Sheree?
Just want to add that I think in Hong Kong perspective, I think the civil aviation departments has some, I think especially why we are getting more improvement in Hong Kong. We see somewhere above 20 a day, or sometimes we can get to 30 plus. So the reason is, as you highlight, more collaboration with the community in terms of the commercial airline slot. The CAT has been more proactive in Hong Kong to chasing the airline to respond whether the flight is on or is it going to be co-share. So more proactive measures has been done, and basically we are all using the slot. So for those that not holding the slot last minute and end up cancel last minute from the commercial, they also get a very heavy penalty from the civil aviation department. So I totally agree. There may be more collaborations in terms of commercial airlines and GABA markets, and I think that's the right direction to go.
Thank you. I saw a couple comments here. Some were talking about Seletar and the dedicated FBO facilities. We know there's the new Business Aviation Center here with a area for business jets, but it is very lacking in its capability, and a lot of complaints have been received. I'm not based here, but we do have an operation here, and I think all of us in this room have heard from our customers about this issue. I think it just goes to show the importance of communication, because the governments, we are talking to the governments through our own individual companies, through associations, and we're highlighting what our needs are and what we want to achieve. And yet sometimes we find that they go and make decisions without consulting us, or they twist what we say and they do something completely different, not really understanding what it is that we're asking for. And so this highlights that the core root of many of these issues is communication and collaboration. So actually, I would like to end on this. David Dixon said yesterday that we really need to have a call to order from everybody in this room with regards to infrastructure. So it's no longer why is Asia so bad? How do I fly in Asia? What can I do to get there? It's what can I do to fix this? Everybody in this room is responsible for helping to innovate the solutions that we will have. You know, we don't want to be in this room year after year just talking about it degrading and we don't have anything. We need to start at the start of the selling process with the OEMs, with the financiers, with the lawyers, and highlight these issues to the owners, the potential buyers, because these are the people with influence, with power and money with the governments. They can go and talk to the right people and move mountains. So without it being commented at the start, we can only hope for the scraps when we're doing ground handling on the ground, at whether that's the FBO or the operator, and then we have to manage the expectation. So with that, we'll conclude. Thank you.
So it's nice to end with a call to action. We've started looking at political risk, we've looked at aircraft risk, and now we're delighted to have Steve Taylor from Aon, who's going to look at credit solutions to encourage growth. Great, thanks.
Hello, everybody. Hello. Let's go by here. Work? Yeah, hi. So I'm conscious that I'm keeping you from lunch, so we'll keep it snappy, I think. I think it's a 20-minute slot. We'll try and make it 10 minutes. What I wanted to do is to just share with you some of the experiences that we're seeing in the aviation sector in respect of how credit solutions are being used to improve funding and working capital. So I work for a company called Aon. We're a professional services company. I work in the insurance part, so insurance broking. I was glad to see all those hands go up about reading insurance contracts in the session earlier. What I'm going to do is split this into 3 parts. So one is, what are the products we're talking about? 2 is, how are they used by lenders and how can they encourage financing? And then the 3rd is, how are they used by corporates and how can they improve working capital for corporates? So first slide. What are credit solutions? Credit solutions are credit insurance, which covers credit risk, non-payments, political risk, which covers non-repossession of the aircraft, and you heard the good presentation earlier today about political risk in the sector. There's a couple of old cases there, Monarch and Alitalia, of insolvency cases, and I put those up because these are cases where insurers paid out on claims, on credit claims. More recent claims, like Privet Air in Switzerland, Avantia in Brazil, and Jet in India, are all keeping the credit insurance markets interested, given the values of the potential exposures that are faced in those areas. So why are lenders using credit insurance? So basically it's one of 3 reasons. So lenders use credit insurance to cover non-payment under the loan agreements. Why will they do that? So one is for risk management, so if perhaps they have an internal limit on a counterparty they're lending to, and they use credit insurance to support the internal limit, to cover the non-payment risk under that financing agreement. The second is concentration. So, for example, if there's a 20 million counterparty internal limit that a funder has on a customer, then credit insurance can be used to increase that counterparty limit to 30 million, 40 million, or even bigger numbers. And then the third is capital, and this is particularly for the commercial lenders, where credit insurance is used to improve the return on equity on transactions. And how is that done? The commercial lenders are using credit insurance and the insurer's rating of A or AA to improve the probability of default on deals and therefore allocate less capital to those transactions. It's a complex area, depends on the regulatory position of the bank, but it's an area. And the part on my left is an example of a transaction and where the insurer sits. So the insurer sits behind the lender, issues an insurance contract to the lender covering the non-payment under the lease agreement. So here's an example of a typical term sheet we would see issued by an insurer. This is an example of Ethiopia, where the credit insurer covered up to 8 years under the underlying term of the lease. It covered the non-payments of the amounts due, the scheduled amounts due under the lease, covered the principal plus the interest. The insurance is triggered on the non-payment under that agreement, and the insurers pay out after a waiting period of between 30 and 180 days, depending on what's agreed in the contract. In terms of pricing, it tends to be priced based on the underlying risk of the corporate, or priced on the basis of margin. So, for example, if the insurer is taking 90% of the risk, 90 of 100 deal, then they would generally charge between 50 and 70% of the net margin on a transaction to take that 90% of the risk. So that's from that's from a lender's perspective. That's why lenders are using credit insurance to support financing and to improve financing facilities. So it'd be interesting to talk to you over lunch as to how that can be applied more perhaps in the business jet, corporate jet context. So from a corporate perspective, so we work with OEMs and with airlines and other companies, and this is a whistle-stop tour of how the product helps, again in the context of liquidity, improving capital and cash flow. So the first is on the receivables side of the balance sheet. So this is money which is owed to the client. So this could be spare parts from an OEM, for example, being sold to customers. There may be multiple customers and receivables value of, say, 100 for ease of number. There might be multiple credit risks within that, multiple ratings. If we credit insure that asset pool of 100, it can become an A or AA rated pool, and therefore that can help the client in raising funding against that receivable, because the bank will perceive the asset pool as an A or AA rated asset. So for example, with engines and leasing of engines, we tend to see the credit insurance product used to cover the non-payment under the lease, covering the net present value of the cash flows due, and covering the default risk of the lessee. And again, the insurance can be used for those three kind of reasons I highlighted before: the risk management, credit, and capital. On the payable side, so on the supply side of the balance sheet, where you have a client that is procuring fuel, for example, then credit insurance can be used to cover the default risk under a fuel supply agreement. It can be used to cover as a replacement for collateral under hedge facilities that are used by lenders on the basis that if a lender is requesting a level of collateral, then credit insurance can slot in to replace that collateral, can be a cheaper alternative and can potentially help improve the capital position on that trade. And then the final two areas I'll just highlight briefly is one where there are third-party guarantees issued to parties in transactions. These could be performance guarantees. There's a product called Surety, which is an insurance product issued, which is a replacement for bank guarantees. And it's quite a cool solution because it can, there's two reasons. One is it improves working capital because bank guarantees would generally tie up a bank facility, whereas the surety facility is outside of that. So is an unsecured facility, so it can be positive for working capital. And the second reason is from a pricing perspective, surety can potentially be cheaper than bank issued guarantees. So that's a pretty neat solution. It's a well-kept secret, but it's something that's definitely worth companies exploring if you're looking at an effective alternative to bank-issued guarantees. And then finally, the product can be used in investments, in acquisitions, to cover deferred consideration on deals, to cover political risk on transactions, and in weird and funky ways, depending on the underlying structure. So that was the three parts I wanted to highlight, and I've kind of run through them over 10 minutes. So one was, what are the products? Two is, what is it from a lender's perspective and how the product's used? And then three is how the product's used from a corporate perspective, and that's across credit, political risk, and surety. So thank you very much for listening. Are there any questions, or do you all want to rush off for lunch, which I'm sure might be the case? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Steve. Thank you. We have got questions, so don't go. Does anyone have an old-fashioned question? We've got two on Slido. One is insurance available for management companies for non-payment in the event of client's default? So this is when the owner would be taking out a contract, I think typically with a 3-month cancellation. Would you be prepared to insure in that?
So potentially, depending on the financial strength of the underlying counterparty, and then if there's any security in the underlying transaction, yeah, the tenor comes into play, the jurisdiction, where the parties are. So the answer is yes, depending on the details.
And these are quite complicated deals, so is there a minimum amount where it becomes cost effective? To do,
Yeah, so for single transactions, I would say anything above 5 million US is then becomes interesting. But the deal sizes go up to hundreds of millions, so it's quite a range.
Great, and we've got a question about captive insurance. I'll let you off on that one, unless you want to.
Appreciate it.
Okay, and it always goes down well finishing early before lunch, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, lunch is where it was yesterday, so you can go left or right round. Thank you.